morning, Senator. I know
Good
that we
morning,
have a
Morgan.
few topics that we want to discuss today, some elections and the turnouts there, and then also some local news on what's happening with regards to the murder rates in the country. So I know that we want to get into that. I think that maybe we wanted to brush up on some stuff that's happening with the U.S. and Iran, and then we'll dive into kind of the deeper topics that we have for today.
Okay, good, Morgan. Well, thank you for being with me this morning. Um, I picked up on this from one of these mails that comes out of the White House, and it had a little heading, and it said, it's kind of the big things that are happening, and it says President meets with Netanyahu and Zelensky, and my eyes rolled, and I thought, oh, please don't have another meeting and another plan for war. But anyway, then right after that, here is the announcement: the U.S. murder rate is on track to reach its lowest level in 126 years. Now, that's huge news, and it's just totally buried under all of the war news. And even to the point where I did some checking because I wanted to be sure, is this really accurate? And indeed it is, and it's extremely dramatic. It relies on a nonprofit group, a think tank called the Council on Criminal Justice. They're a nonpartisan think tank designed to come up with data-driven solutions to crime problems. And a lot of the data that they use is the FBI's data, which I think is reasonably accurate. And they follow crime rates that go back to 1900, when it's sort of the first time that there were any records maintained. But in any event, this report says homicide rate dropped to about 4 people in 100,000. And it said this will be the lowest rate since the year 1900 if it's confirmed by FBI data at the year's end. In other words, right now, we are at the lowest rate since the year 1900. And the fact is that the homicide rate is actually dropping more rapidly as the year passes. So unless something dramatic happens, it seems almost certain that we will hit that record. And here we are. We're closing in on the end of the year. In addition to the murder rate being spectacularly low, carjacking, burglary, car thefts have also decreased very substantially. Now, what's interesting is that the murder rate peaked in the first half of 2022. Homicides hit an all-time high under Joe Biden's presidency, and this was a time when the southern border had collapsed. Drugs and alien criminals were swept across the border, along with the other millions of illegal aliens. And then they mentioned that there are 4 of the cities, and I added the idea, each one of them is overwhelmingly Democratic, where murder rates have actually increased during this span that they're particularly focused on from 2019 until today. Mm-hmm. And one was Norfolk, Virginia, which is interesting because Democrats have taken power in the whole state, and they're releasing felons from the prisons here in Virginia. They're reducing the rates. They're making it difficult to track felons by expunging their records. Um, and so the environment in Virginia is horrible for crime. It's very pro-crime. And in Norfolk, Virginia, the murder rate has increased by 36%.
Mm.
The same time that we're hitting this all-time decline in murder rates in the rest of the country. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, the murder rate went up 26%. Of course, Minneapolis is where you've got a governor who is against ICE. He's driven the ICE law enforcement out of the city of Minneapolis. You just got sort of a vast criminal element that has sway in Minneapolis these days. And interestingly, in Austin, Texas, which is the bluest city in Texas, it's been known for a long time. I lived for several years in Texas, and Austin is not like the rest of Texas. They had the biggest spike in murders between 2019 and 2026. Their murder rate went up 74% at a time when the entire nation as a whole is reaching a sort of a historic decline. So something, and I haven't dug into all the details of Austin, Texas, but clearly they have got a severe problem that's probably cultural, political, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting.
Yeah. You know, I was the chief of the criminal law division for the Army and the Pentagon. And so, you know, I have a considerable interest in these things.
Mm-hmm.
When Ronald Reagan took over, I was a senior trial counsel at Fort Hood, Texas, and the change in law and order was so dramatic. It was a wonderful time to be a JAG officer if you were a hard-nosed law and order person, because every day something dramatic happened. Mm-hmm. And I give you one example, Morgan. You might appreciate this little piece of history. This was right after Reagan had taken over as president, and there was a fellow named Red Fuller. He was a general in the Inspector General's office at the Pentagon, and he had come down. He'd done an inspection of the command at Fort Hood, Texas, and he issued a scathing report on the quality of law and order and so forth. And so at the time, I was the head of the defense and legal assistance branch, and but even though I was the head of defense, you know, I had been in prosecution just before, and the only reason I was in defense is that the fellow who headed up the defense section was relieved for cause, and I was called in and told, I know you don't want to do this, but you're going over there and you're gonna run it. It turned out to be a great time that I spent for about a year or so. But anyway, so I had this wonderful clerk. He's a great young kid, and everybody in the 3 Corps legal office knew that I was just revolted by the fact that right behind the 3 Corps legal office, where we probably had, I don't know, 35, 40 attorneys working there. Right behind there, they had set up something that was commonly called the wine tree. And what had happened, the command had put out picnic tables and so forth. And in the morning, the troops would go to formation. And after formation, they'd go to the Class 6 liquor store. They'd buy a bottle of liquor. they'd come out to the wine tree and they'd spend the whole day just totally, bombed. And they would pee in public by these picnic tables, and I despise. Everybody knew I had come out of the Marine Corps, and I couldn't stand it. So anyway, this young kid, he knocks at the door. He says, and I was a major. He said, Major, he says, there's something you got to see. I said, what is it? I was kind of in a hurry with something. He said, Major, he said, I think you got to see this for yourself. So we were within sight of the wine tree. So he took me to the front door, opened the door. I looked out, and all of a sudden, by the way, as soon as Reagan took office, he relieved the commander of Fort Hood, Texas, commanding general. He sent Red Fuller, who had done the scathing report, and he had taken command of the post. So he had only been there for like 2 days or so. And so I go out and I look, and here are 3 or 4 big 6x truckloads with MPs. And the MPs got down off the trucks. They went out where all of the wine tree bums and hobos in uniform were hanging out. And they took the names and identification of all of those guys, sent them back to their unit. They loaded up all of the picnic tables and so forth, all of the stuff. And then they posted off limits signs. So it made it unlawful. It was a crime to enter what had been the wine tree. And that was day 1. Day 2, an order came out through the command that the Class 6 liquor store was permanently closed and it was going to be dispersed. And that was done. And we just began to march. And I mean, this went on for years afterwards with the military improving its law, order, and discipline. I mean, it had just been an organized mob before that. I mean, and you could drive around on Fort Hood and you saw these guys, their shirts would be tied around their waist. They'd be going barebacked. And I mean, they look like a bunch of hobos. And it was very dramatic, the change. Well, anyway, there is a tremendous difference between law and order with Republicans and with Democrats. It's one of the most dramatic differences between the party. So anyway, so I was looking at some of the factors that I think have tied into this dramatic drop in. And I'm just going to run through them. The first was the restoration of law and order at the southern border. All of a sudden, the masses of humanity pouring across stopped. We began deporting criminal aliens. Under Biden, you'd heard all the Democrats saying, well, let's defund the police. Let's defund the police. Let's get rid of police. And so that was reversed. And the defund the police movement ended. It's gone. We have aggressive ICE actions. We saw an end to the BLM and Antifa riots, the looting, the arson that had been going on for some years. And there's just sort of a general public disgust at all of the anti-police rhetoric. People just were fed up with hearing this kind of thing. In the public schools, there was a rejection. Now, not in Virginia. Virginia, this still goes on because we're a Democrat-run state now. But in most places, there's been a rejection of critical race theory where they were teaching little school children that, okay, separate yourselves in this class. the ones with lighter skin go over here, the ones with darker skins over here. And then the teacher would say, okay, look, these ones with lighter skin, they're oppressors. And they've done evil things to you. And you with the darker skins, you're oppressed. And the idea was, hey, whatever this group gets, they deserve. And it provided sort of a moral justification for violence to be committed. And so in any event, it was a very dangerous concept. It still goes on, but critical race theory has certainly died out to a considerable extent. We had the federal crackdowns on crime with the National Guard going into places like Washington, D.C., Chicago, Portland, Memphis, New Orleans. And it not only was it important because, you know, you had National Guard, you had federal law enforcement that went in, and what they did, they targeted the repeat offenders in these crime crackdowns. And typically it is the repeat offenders who really are the heart and soul of the crime wave. And so by doing this, even though, you know, it could only be done in certain places, it sent a message. It sent the message that we as a nation don't accept violence in our streets, and we're going to crack down on it. Mm-hmm. And so that empowered governors to do things on their own, to toughen things up. So I think that was very helpful.
Yes, and I'm curious. There's a little bit of echo on my end on your audio. Actually, and now it's gone. Maybe it just started at the beginning. But the how does one, I guess, confront crime while still respecting the civil liberties of the American citizens? I think this comes at a time where you have the flock cameras, you have companies like Palantir who are working with the NSA, Defense Department, who are trying to find ways to surveil Americans. You have Edward Snowden that came out and said that you are being surveilled by the NSA in ways that are not constitutional. So how do you navigate confronting crime while still trying to respect the Constitution and the civil liberties that it entrusts in?
Sure. The greatest danger that we have a couple of things, but the greatest danger is to the Fourth Amendment, the right to be free from unlawful searches and seizures, and the explosion of computer technology and now AI has made it very easy to go into private spaces and to search those. Now, the Constitution allows for searches based on probable cause, and as a general proposition, you require a warrant. Now, there are exceptions, and there are important, reasonable exceptions, but generally you have to have a warrant to do a search and seizure. When you mentioned the floss, is it called the
flock? It's like the
flock, like a flock, like all sorts of cameras. That's very dangerous because, you know, if you didn't care about anything but suppression of crime, you could just have a sort of a tyrannical government that just sort of burst into people's homes at will. The Fourth Amendment, it creates a compromise that says, look, we value privacy and we don't believe that the government has the ability to just simply search through all of your belongings all the time. So we really have to be constantly diligent. And this is a very dangerous time because we've got companies like Palantir that have ways of assembling all of this computerized information and using it to go after, whatever they're after at the time.
Yeah.
We are going to be struggling. Well, we've struggled forever to make sure that we protect the rights of people against unreasonable searches and seizures. And I fought fought enormous battles to keep these red light cameras from coming into Virginia, and we kept them out for quite a long time, and then basically the liberals began to take over, and now you've got cameras all over the place. Well, that was sort of the predecessor of these flock cameras, which, they're much more sophisticated, much more intrusive. They take pictures. Now they run them through AI and they analyze, well, where were you this time? What are your patterns of movement? And then they say, well, look, we detected some crimes, some serious crimes. Well, I think we should all be comfortable with the notion that the Fourth Amendment is sacrosanct and that you do not have a right to unreasonable searches and seizures. And any time that the government just routinely searches, that is unlawful under the Fourth Amendment. I don't know any way that you can justify these flock cameras. They maybe they're good for this, good for that. That's neither here nor there. You cannot have those things and have people have a reasonable right to protection against unreasonable searches, because they're constantly doing unreasonable searches, and they're doing it under the imprimatur of the government. So we can't possibly allow those things, and that's a great observation.
Yeah, I'd say that because it's, from my perspective, even though given I was very young when it happened, it appears to me this booming of kind of chipping away at civil liberties started with, in my opinion, when you're more than welcome to disagree, I'd love to hear the points, was the Patriot Act after 9/11, where it started to take away our civil liberties in the name of national security.
Yes.
And then now we hear that name being thrown around for any kind of apparatus that they want to use to broaden their surveillance. And you have individuals, like we said, Peter Thiel of Palantir. You have Larry Ellison, who owns, I think, the largest media source. He's gone on record saying, basically boasting about how there will be surveillance everywhere, so people will have to be on their best behavior. Basically kind of saying some Orwellian world that he wants to create, where it kind of seems like it's unfolding with the flock cameras, with the introduction of Palantir, with the NSA and the Pentagon and their projects that are going on. So it seems like there's like this snowball effect that continues to happen under the name of national security.
I don't want people to be on their best behavior. Let me tell you, I don't want people to murder people. I don't want people to rape people. I don't want people to steal cars, but I don't want people to be on their best behavior. I want people to have some slack, and sometimes they're going to do some things that maybe they shouldn't do. I don't want a society that is so rigidly ordered that people have to be on their best behavior, because the only way you are on your best behavior is if you are kowtowing to forces that are truly evil in this world.
Yeah.
Now,
Or yeah, it's fear is kind of ruling your obedience in a way.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I think first of all, I totally agree with, I think the Patriot Act needs to be gone. I'm not nearly as worried about overseas actors as I am with domestic actors.
Mhm.
Yeah, we need to have some reasonable protections against foreign issues, but I would say 95, 98, 99% of our problems are domestic, and the threats that we face to our civil liberties are domestic. They have nothing to do with Russia. They have a lot to do with Israel, unfortunately, because Israel has dominance over a great deal of what happens in this country, and it's a very unhealthy
Yeah,
type of situation.
I think you have members in the CIA who are raising alarms because the integration is still on the table with the Israeli, the IDF, and the U.S. military. So they're kind of raising alarms. I believe the CIA says that Israel's intelligence does the most like surgical and methodical surveillance than any other allied nation that they ever have assessed. And so now we'll be kind of giving them the golden key to a lot of our operations and our capabilities, which they want to sound the alarms on.
Yeah, yeah, it's the danger that we face from Israel is incalculable. And anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But
Yeah.
anyway, I think the now the other thing I did want to mention before we pass on, you raised the Fourth Amendment issues, which I think we probably are in total agreement with that. The other thing that concerns me a little bit is I think we have had some loss of First Amendment freedom, and what I see is on the campuses where there have been demonstrations against what's going on, what the Israelis have been doing to the people of Gaza, what they have been doing to the people of the West Bank, what they have been doing to the people of Lebanon. Um, uh, I'm very uncomfortable with the suppression of reasonable speech. I you know, I've seen a lot of riots and a lot of really nasty things over my lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I have not seen where the demonstrations of the students and other people against what's going on uh, in the Middle East. I have not seen where that has crossed the line. It's really been one of the most reasonable, most orderly protest movements that I've seen. I've seen some protest movements that raise the hair on the back of your neck. Vietnam War protests were very violent, very often quite violent. The civil rights protests were more like a violent revolution with people being murdered and looted and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know of one fellow who died accidentally during an argument over the Palestinian issue, but as a general proposition, people haven't been injured in the student protest. There have been a couple of sit-ins, but these weren't sit-ins like the Black Panthers back when I was a student. Black Panthers were taking over major universities with guns. They bring in shotguns, rifles, pistols, and they go into the president's office and threaten him, with armed violence. There's none of this in the protests against the what many people believe is genocide going on in Gaza. So I think we got to watch out for the Fourth Amendment, protect that. We've got to watch out for the First Amendment. But
Yeah. I do another show on Thursdays. It's called The Whiners. This past guest we had Janine Yunez. She's a constitutional attorney, and she just took a case with Max Blumenthal. Max Blumenthal, who's a journalist from the Gray Zone, and he writes war coverage, and oftentimes he's very critical of the American government and the actions they take. We visited Iran with many other journalists from probably the mainstream media, we would probably say. On his way back, he was taken questioned by Border Patrol. Border Patrol would ask him questions on, who paid for the trip, basically, I guess, who he allies with, is he a communist? And then they did more of a egregious action where they asked him to open his phone in front of them. And he refused to do so. Then they confiscated his phone and said that don't worry, we'll figure out how to get into it. So this litigation goes into trying to seize back his materials. When they first entered the litigation into the courts, the State Department called Max Blumenthal, said that they have his phones. It was two phones that he was forcefully taken from his person. And they reassured him that they could not get into the phone. So they were never seized any information.
Well, that makes you feel good, doesn't it? I mean, how do you know? How do you know what's happened? How do you know whether somebody from Mossad or CIA or whatever didn't just download everything that you got, every conversation, everything?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that because it goes in hand with what you're saying. It seems like there is this intolerance for critical speech, and it even goes beyond critical speech of our state. It goes beyond for the critical speech of a foreign state, which is the state of Israel, which is very alarming. We have some of the they would be
Morgan, if you think of it, if these protests had been the same exact protests against the American involvement in the war, and it hadn't had anything to do with Israel, nobody would have cared. It just wouldn't have mattered. But you've got these very wealthy Zionists, the mega billionaires, the big contributors, and they just won't put up with it. They're not going to allow it. And
yeah, it's very alarming, and it's very alarming what happened to Max Blumenthal, because I feel like the free speech, First Amendment right that should be upheld the most is the critical speech of one's government, let alone a foreign government. So it's it's very alarming to see those kind of actions played out. And, people like Janine Yunez, who's the constitutional attorney, is really doing great work and trying to call out these actions as unconstitutional. And I know that we wanted to pivot to a new segment, which I think is kind of goes into hand what we're talking about, which is the public sentiment. They are sick and tired of this, browbeating you to be just unequivocally allied with the state of Israel, so much so that you have a lot of these elections that are basically going against voting in a candidate strictly on their stance of not being staunchly allied with the state of Israel. I think we want to go into that particular with it was Michigan and Al Said, which kind of upset a lot of the mainstream media and like, for lack of better terms, a Zionist, because he won in large numbers.
Yeah, this was a very interesting race up in Michigan. What you have, you've got a U.S. senator, Democrat, who is retiring, and so it opens up a seat, and so you always have lots of challengers. And so we have just had the Democratic primary, at which time the Democrats select which is going to be their candidate. So you had two very strong contenders. You had El Said, and El Said he has been extremely outspoken against the war in Israel, against the terrible, hideous things happening that being done by the Jewish settlers in the West Bank, by what's going on all through the Middle East, in Lebanon, and then you have, on the other hand, you have this Michigan state, not state representative, but U.S. representative Haley Stevens, a member of Congress, and now Stevens is what passes for a moderate in the Democratic Party, and she is very pro-Israel. Mm-hmm. And so AIPAC, AIPAC, which is the American-Israeli PAC, they have gargantuan sums of money. They have enormous control over the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress. And they moved in and they backed this Representative Haley Stevens and gave at least $30 million directly out of AIPAC funds, and much of the rest of the funds that she got came from various pro-Zionist elements. And at the same time, El Sayed, the fellow on the screen there, he had a very modest amount of funding. He was outspent at least 10-1. And so what happens is the battle really boiled down to sort of a struggle, sort of a proxy fight over the Gaza war, over all of the, Israel boasts about how they're fighting 7 different wars, and I don't doubt it. I think they probably are fighting at least 7 wars and promoting probably a dozen others. And they everywhere there's an outbreak of war, you have to say, okay, is there's an Israeli tie-in? But in any event, you had El Sayed win, and he won pretty dramatically. Very, very strong win on his part. Well, no, I apologize. It was a narrow win, but it was a big deal because of the tremendous amount spent against him. The actual vote tally was close, and so
there was a lot of interviews on the scene of people who had just voted, and a lot of them may have not agreed with everything El Sayed had on his platform, but just the differences in the rhetoric that both of the candidates were using, particularly on war and their allegiance to Israel, is what really won them over, which was very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. I have a clip from Haley Stevens, and I have a few clips from El Sayed we can play where you can see or ask yourself, like, who are they truly serving? This is for the Michigan Senate seat. So I'm gonna go ahead and play Haley. Well, I'll play Haley Stevens first, and then we'll go on to how El Sayed would say on like CNN news outlets.
Okay.
In the United States Congress, I will continue to fight for the people of Israel. I will continue to fight for Israel's existence. Israel comes to me in my dreams. I see Israel's future, and I know that Israel will continue to exist for the Jewish people.
Wow.
So that
wow. I hope she sees the future of America and hopes that America will continue to survive. I hope she has some interest in the United States and our people.
And here's a segment with El Sayed, who's kind of being prodded on the exact issue of our allegiance to the state of Israel.
I believe Israel has a right to exist. So Casey, AIPAC's become a big issue in this election because AIPAC's already spent $30 million in this election. They're by far the biggest spender in the race. Now, the question about a right to exist, it's interesting because nobody's ever asked me whether or not I believe Palestine has a right to exist. Every single president who served has said that they believe in a two-state solution. Israel exists. The question is whether or not we want a politics where our money is sent over to Israel to do genocide and apartheid instead of investing in our own kids.
You say it exists, but does it have a right to?
No, I didn't say that. I just said the question of Israel's existence is not a question. I'm not going to play this gotcha game about whether or not it has a right to exist. The question ultimately is about whether or not we want a politics that dignifies.
You're not going to play the gotcha game, but you're not going to say you think Israel has a right to exist.
Well, my question, Casey, I think the question we all ought to ask is, does everybody have equal rights to peace, dignity, and self-determination? That's Jewish, Israelis, and Palestinians. And to me, the folks who should answer what the ultimate peace there looks like should be Jewish, Israelis, and Palestinians. I want my tax dollars spent here in Michigan to provide schools in Michigan, to build healthcare in Michigan, to invest in Michigan, rather than to be sent abroad to kill Palestinian people, do genocides and apartheid. The question about whether or not Israel has a right to exist is actually quite secondary to whether or not they have a right to our tax dollars. And people don't ask that question in good faith. So if you want to ask me about Palestinian right to exist, if you want to ask me about what I want to do for kids in Michigan, I'm happy to answer that question. But the AIPAC and Israel have become secondary questions that too many people have to talk about because our tax dollars keep getting spent over there rather than being spent over here.
So that's, yeah, those are the two differences, and that, the people of Michigan had to vote either for, which it kind of seems like there's a clear person who has the vested interest in the actual people of Michigan versus how the other candidate that seems like just to kick the can down the road with the status quo that has continued to just allow, just unquestioned money to the state of Israel and any other nations. He does speak about funding to other nations he wants to cut as well. He said that he wants to keep the money within the nation, which I think is very profound. We don't really hear that, with the amount of money that we spend to other nations is completely absurd when we have so many infrastructure issues and projects that we should be tending here.
Yeah. Now, I think, that we've got this democratic socialist movement. I think what really propels it's gotten very extreme. But I think what gives it its real oomph is this Israel problem. The fact that, the Republicans are not trying to have some reasonable limits on Israel. And I think people are very uncomfortable with what Israel's doing and with all the wars that they're dragging us into. But now I think the future for the Democratic Socialists is probably going to be more in big Democrat cities. It's going to be a challenge to win in Michigan. Now, on the one hand, you have Mike Rogers, the Republican candidate, who is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. My guess is that will be as much of a problem as it'd be perhaps a hindrance, because he's going to be asked, what do you think about the Iran war? Do you support the Iran war? And what does he say at that point? So that's going to be a little bit of a problem for him, but I see a couple of problems for al-Sayed. Many years ago, I backed a candidate, Ollie North, who was running for U.S. Senate in Virginia. And when we won the nomination, I was kind of a novice in politics, and to me it was, oh, this is great, we've won. But I remember looking at him and his closest advisors, because I wasn't sitting too far away, and I was kind of surprised because I could tell there was some distress with them. And it wasn't until later that I realized that Ollie North at that time recognized that this was the fact that his nomination was by a close vote of the Republicans, it showed that there was a split in the Republican Party that was going to be difficult to mend. And despite enormous efforts by a lot of really enthusiastic folks like myself, we fell a little bit short, and we lost the election to the Democrats. Now, I see something similar happening with El Said, where the numbers were close, and I mistakenly said they were big numbers, but just considering the money, that it was big. But the actual numbers showed that the Democrats were pretty closely split between the two candidates, and that's going to be difficult because it shows that there were a lot of people who did not support El Said on the Democrat side. Now, there was a very important comment made by Representative Van Cliburn, a black congressman from South Carolina. Now, he's actually got some importance in the Democratic Party because he was the kingmaker who got Biden the Democratic nomination when Biden was finally nominated. Biden was running behind, and then Van Cliburn threw the black vote in the direction of Biden, and that was it. Biden won in South Carolina. And so Van Cliburn made a comment about the race with Al Said, and he said, and this is a quote, he said, "I saw a picture that concerned me from the rally. I didn't see a single person that looks like me. That tells me all I need to know." What he's talking about, there was a picture with a huge audience. I'm guessing it was 800,000 people in a very big convention center or something. And I just very quickly scanned this picture. I did not see a single black face. I'm sure there was somewhere in there. There had to be. But it was very predominantly white, or people with lighter skin. And so I think the racial divide in Michigan is going to be a potentially fatal flaw for Al Said, because about 12 to 13% of the midterm voters in Michigan are black traditionally. So you got a pretty good block of black voters. And so if El Said loses just 1 or 2% of that black vote, which I think is at a minimum, he will lose that. He could easily lose the race to Mike Rogers. And if Mike Rogers is smart about this, I think that he could peel off a good bit more of the Democrat black vote. Some will vote for him and some just won't vote, but either way, it's going to hurt El Said. So now Said, he's a youthful, energetic, articulate, smart candidate. And so he's got some things going for him. He just by virtue of being younger and physically fit, nice looking fellow, that gives him a point or two. This is just the reality of politics.
American politics at its finest, yes.
And I've always looked at it this way, whether it's a Democrat race or Republican race, physical attributes bring you. I've always just sort of had a standard rule of thumb. You get 3% if you're younger, if you're, as long as you're, fit, pleasant looking and so forth. Yeah. So Al Said's going to get that kicker of several points. But At the same time, Mike Rogers is probably going to get AIPAC money that,
Another thing, yeah.
because AIPAC is able to spend vast sums of money because it's sort of like a circular machine where Congress gives vast sums of money to Israel and all the people who invest in these things. They get the money, they send it to AIPAC. AIPAC puts people in congressional offices and controls what takes place. And they make sure that the next batch of money gets shoveled out. So it goes back and forth. U.S. taxpayer money going to Israel, finding its way back into AIPAC and similar organizations, and goes round and round. And the American people are just on the receiving end of the whole thing.
No, it seems like Americans are getting a bit more wiser to it, and they don't really give stomach the appetite. So I hope that kind of shows through in this race. And I think that this is probably a good area to stop, Senator. If you wanted to continue, we can.
Yes, I think perhaps we could. Did you want to just touch briefly on a couple of the things happening over in Israel with the? I think you had the video of the monastery that was taken over by the religious Jews.
Mm-hmm. So you have, I believe on August 2nd, you had a altercation with 6 religious Jews in Jerusalem's Old City. They were attacking, spitting, and throwing rocks at St. James Armenian Monastery. The Israeli police actually apprehended 6 of the individuals and gave them a ban for 15 days to not enter into the Old City, which you have a lot of the Armenian Christians who are wanting more to be done because this isn't just a one-off occurrence. I believe that there was, this is caught by CCTV cameras, but there was video footage caught by an Armenian woman who was nearby the church, and she was just recording what was happening. They turned their sights onto her, started throwing rocks at her, and were spouting abuses at her. You have some of the members within the St. James Armenian Monastery who are actually writing to U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee to recognize these instances that these crimes against Christians are happening, and to indict these crimes, or basically describe these crimes as hate crimes. We know Mike Huckabee has shown kind of very blind support for the state of Israel, where he has turned a blind eye to these attacks on Christians. And this is just another point where he, as of right now, he has not come out and said anything. So that
I don't think we'll ever hear anything pro-American from Mike Huckabee when it comes to Israel. He will accept any behavior on the part of the Israelis, no matter what. People don't understand. Israel has always had an intense bitterness towards Christians. It's not just towards Muslims, but in 1948, Palestine, which eventually became Israel, had 10 to 12.5% Christians. Anyway, a significant block of Christians. And over the years, due to various predations on the Christians, they've fallen down to where they're less than 2% of the population. Start off at 10%, down below 2%. And recently, there was a forum that was put together to discuss ways to Judaize the Galilee region of Israel. And the Galilee is part of Israel. About 60% of all remaining Christians live in Galilee, which was where, you know, Jesus had his ministry, and many of the Israelis live in Nazareth, and these are biblical areas. This was where Christianity began, and the Forum for Judaizing the Galilee, it was designed to discuss ways that they could simply eliminate the inhabitants there and replace them with Jewish settlers. And so this is a continuing problem. You know, back when the European Jewish people settled Israel, what's now Israel, back in 1948, that was the beginning. About 40% of all of the Christians who lived in Palestine became refugees because their homes and farms had been stolen by these Europeans who came over and took them. And so this is a long-term thing. It's sort of a, I don't know whether you call it racial, religious type of feeling within Israel that everybody else is an enemy. You know, Christians are enemies, Muslims are enemies, Arabs generally are enemies.
Yes, and they're the ones that kind of can be exploited by the American, I guess, medias to also be the enemy, in that sense, to help aid Israel's ambition to annex Gaza, take over more Lebanon, which, you know, you and I both stated, it's not solely, you know, a Muslim area. You have a lot of historic churches in Lebanon who have been flattened by Israel in this conquest. We've played a video here before of an Israeli religious Jew who assaulted and kicked a nun and pushed her down to the ground in broad daylight, and it was caught by another CCTV camera. You have a lot of the Jewish extremists claiming this to be a religious duty. And with the Likud party in power, that is emboldened and has spiked since 2023, since the Hamas invasion into the Kibbutz Be'eri and in Israel, and the preceding genocide that has, you know, conducted by Israel since. You have Ben Gvir, who had a radio interview maybe a little less than a decade ago, where he also was asked about this violence that's being portrayed or being done towards Christians in the state of Israel, in Jerusalem, the old city, and he described it as an ancient Jewish tradition, therefore it's not a crime, further emboldening some of these fanatics to go and take these actions and be more egregious with their violence towards Christians there. So I think that's very important to note, that you have kind of this top-down approach where it's giving an acceptance and almost not only an approval, but wants to encourage these actions to happen more, to make it so unsuitable for these Christians to reside there that they have no other option but to flee.
Yes, I think that's the case. Well, listen, anyway, that gives us a wrap for today. And Morgan, thank you for co-hosting the show.
Thank you so much, Senator. It was great. It was great hearing from you, and I really enjoyed the input on, trying to navigate, trying to have and remain liberties, and not forgoing, the liberties for the pursuit of security, or that term that we like to hear now is national security, that allows so many rights to be chipped away at. So I think that was a very important note that we kind of touched on. And I want to encourage everybody to tune in next week, Saturday, to focus on the news. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Morgan.